So thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed coming to Davis to talk. I'm a graduate of UC Davis. I got my undergraduate degree here in Native American Studies with a minor in community development. And I don't know if they still have many minors in environmental studies. And my master's degree in community development with a focus on environmental and economic policy in indigenous communities, as well as my law degree. So sorry, I'm not used to talking with the mask. This is the first time I've done an in-person talk since I've been appointed, so bear with me. So again, it's a real pleasure to be back here. I've spent a lot of time at UC Davis, and I have taught some classes with the Native American Studies Department and the law school in the past as a lecturer. After graduating from UC Davis, I went to work for well, while I was in law school, I did work with California Indian Legal Services. I did work with the Mediation Center through UC Extension, working with community groups and for military base closures for restoration advisory boards, where they were negotiating and mitigation for cleanup on closures for military bases. And I worked for the US Department of Justice as a summer intern working on environmental issues dealing with once through cooling power plants. After law school, I went to work for Sacramento Child Advocates representing dependent children, doing a lot of Indian Child Welfare Act work. And one of the reasons I decided to do that work was, one, ICWA was very important, and I wanted to get the trial experience because I was on a daily court calendar. After 2 years of working there, I went to work for the California Energy Commission during the first energy crisis, I guess, the one in early 2000, for 5 years. And then I went into private practice for a small firm that represents tribes across the country, working on tribal environmental and energy issues, as well as federal recognition, land claims, water rights. I did that for about 12 years, and then I went back to I stayed working for the Public Utilities Commission as an administrative law judge for roughly almost 4 years, and then the California Energy Commission was looking for a chief counsel, and so I went to go work for them. And about a year into that job, the governor's office asked if I'd consider this position, so I'm now a commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission. So that's sort of a very quick run through. I don't know if anyone has any questions on career path. Over the course of my career, have worked on power plant siting, rate cases, distributed energy resource issues, efficiency, just about anything you can think of that deals with energy. So if there aren't questions, I'll go into my presentation. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. So you, the way you talked about it was kind of like you ended up in this position. Did you have designs on kind of ambitions to be in this type of role?
So when I was in law school taking energy law classes, it was like, how do you get to be an energy commissioner? That's, it seemed like such a big deal. Now I'm there and I'm realizing you don't get as much information. But so I guess in the back of my head, I always thought it would be great to be in that position. I don't know up until the last couple of years that I've thought about looking at a possible appointment. My position as chief counsel at the California Energy Commission was an amazing job working with great people. So I would have been completely happy staying there as well. But I think this gives me a real opportunity to make some statements and hopefully make some changes. I'm not sure how much you've delved into how the PUC works, but sometimes things take a very long time. So now being in the position, I'm really looking at what are the 2 or 3 things I want to get done in 6 years, because it isn't really that much time to try and make some of these changes when the proceedings there sometimes last for years, or they merge into another proceeding. So you're only doing like small incremental things sometimes. But you're also reacting, and sometimes you have to do very big things very fast. So it's not very consistent either.
And a follow-on question to that, you mentioned you recognized you needed trial experience, right? So over the years, you've seen what kind of skills you needed to develop. Students here starting out, or not starting out, but transitioning. Are there thoughts or like suggestions you have for them as they think about skills they should develop?
And keeping in mind, I took my track as a lawyer and a policy person. I think it's important to understand how government works, how it's in this area, and how the Energy Commission works, how the PUC works, but also how private entities work. I think the broader experience you can get. I know for me, having been out in private practice and been sort of on the other side of advocating and lobbying to government has really helped me in what I'm doing and having, I think, a better understanding of what people are looking for when they're coming to us, and just understanding, like I said, as broad a range as you can. I think having internships, or you can work for the agencies like the CEC or the PUC, and then work with entities that are dealing with them, so you can get it, I think, as broad a range as possible. And understanding, I think rate making really helps, even if it's just a base level understanding, because even if that's not what you're directly doing, so much of our energy policy in this state is dependent on how we deal with rates and who's paying for what, and how those programs are financed. Okay, any other questions? And I don't know, are you okay if I sit down, or I don't know? Like I said, it's been a while. I used to have to fly to New York with like a half hour's notice sometimes, and now it's like difficult to get across town. We're not used to it. So today I'm going to talk about distributed energy resource action plan, and focus on load flexibility and our recently opened high DER grid planning proceeding. So I'm the assigned commissioner for our distributed energy resource action plan, and a lot of the DER issues that we're dealing with. And I'm really excited about being part of that, because I think that's going to be a huge part of our energy future here in California, especially if we're going to meet our SB 100 goals to get to clean, low, no carbon emissions by 2045. We're going to have to rethink what we're doing with the grid and what kind of energy resources we're using. I'm also going to talk about our environmental and social justice action plan, some of the microgrid projects that we are partnering with the California Energy Commission on for that are on tribal lands in California, and our climate adaptation proceeding, which I'm also the assigned commissioner for. I have a lot of slides in here. I'm not sure if we are going to get through all of them, but I have provided a copy of the PowerPoint if anybody's interested in it. So I think Allie's going to keep me on track. We may have to stop early, but she'll let me know when I need to stop. Okay, so we're going to start with our the Distributed Energy Resource Action Plan 2.0. Is anyone familiar with our DER Action Plan 1.0? Okay. So what is distributed energy resources, or DERs? DERs are resources connected to the electric distribution system grid, typically located close to load, that can be used individually or in aggregate to provide value to the grid, individual customers, or both. Examples include rooftop solar, energy storage, energy efficiency, demand response, and electric vehicles. And I know that is a big issue that we are looking at. How do we use electric vehicles, both as transportation and potentially going forward as storage to power homes? So what is the DER action plan? So the California Public Utilities Commission has literally dozens of proceedings that develop policy to incentivize and guide DER deployment and operations. We've got proceedings to set compensation rates for rooftop solar that's exported to the grid. We've got proceedings to set safety and reliability rules for those systems to operate in parallel or to connect with the grid, to coordinate activities across multiple proceedings and align the PUC's visions and actions in shaping California's DER future. And so the DER action plan is basically a roadmap for the PUC decision makers, staff, and stakeholders to facilitate forward-thinking DER policy. And the action plan is intended to align the PUC's vision with actions that can be taken by stakeholders to ensure DER policy implementation in support of SB 100 and California's energy and climate goals that are coordinated across proceedings related to grid planning, affordability, load flexibility, market integration, and customer programs. And are you familiar with SB 100? Okay, I'm assuming you are, but just in case I thought I would ask. So the goals of the action plan are to maximize the ratepayer and societal value of millions of DERs on the grid while ensuring affordable and equitable rates. And the plan is meant to determine, it's not meant to determine outcomes in individual proceedings. So that's very important. It's meant to coordinate and set high-level overarching policy, but it's not determinative of what the outcome is going to be in a particular proceeding. So the first, our current DER action plan 1.0 focused on 3 what are called tracks or pillars, and the first one is rates. And under that, we're looking at customer choice, time varying rates, innovative rates and tariffs, affordable to non-DER customers. The second track is grid infrastructure, which looks at transparent planning and sourcing, utility 2.0 IOU business models, technology neutral sourcing, recognize full greenhouse gas grid service values, streamlined interconnection, DER enabling grid investments for ratepayer benefit, data communications, and cybersecurity. The third track looks at market integration. So we're looking at robust DER participation in wholesale markets, multiple revenue streams, market and interconnection rules supportive of behind the meter DERs, predictable EV behavior in grid operations, and non-discriminatory market rules for EVs. So example of a DER action plan items fulfilled. So here we've made progress on many of the elements of the plan, including providing incentives to jumpstart nascent industries, reforming utility distribution planning and interconnection to leverage the benefits of DERs, and facilitating DER integration into wholesale markets. This slide provides an example of the progress with our distribution resource plan proceeding has made over the last 5 years to better incorporate DERs into utility grid planning. And I'm not sure how well you can see that, and I'm getting old, so my eyes are not great. But on the far left-hand side, it talks about reform distribution, utility distribution planning to use DERs instead of wires if and when possible. And then to provide third-party DER providers with information about where DERs can go best, and reoriented grid investments described in our general rate cases to integrate DERs. And bear with me for a minute. And so if you look at the top box, the distribution investment deferral program, so it looks at load and DER growth and forecasting, and there's a grid assessment, which identifies distribution system deficiencies to determine grid needs, and that's combined with an analysis for potential load transfers for no-cost solutions. And there's lots of acronyms here. And then we've got the distribution deferral opportunities report, which identifies planned distribution upgrades and candidates for deferral projects. And then we've got distribution deferral approval, which occurs through an advice letter to review and approve DER projects. Does everyone, do you know what an advice letter is? So when the Public Utilities Commission makes decisions, many of our decisions are made through, unlike most agencies, we make them through a formal process that usually includes assigning a assigned commissioner and assigned administrative law judge. And typically what you will see, like at the CEC or other agencies, you'll have like a rulemaking issued, and then stakeholders will submit comments. Those comments will be considered. There'll be a workshop, and then there'll be a decision by the agency, and they'll often take public comment in a meeting, whether virtual or in person, in addition to written comments. The Public Utilities Commission, again, they assign a commissioner, an administrative law judge, And then you have party status. So stakeholders become parties and they file formal comments or testimony that goes on the record. There could be hearings with cross-examination of witnesses and briefing on the issues and then a formal decision. So in our DER proceedings, there's decisions that sort of set out what I'm walking through on this slide right now. And in those decisions, they can direct the utilities to do certain things like analysis in this case for looking at no cost solutions to the grid. And then they, as long as they're meeting the requirements of that overlying decision, they can submit what's called an advice letter that sets out the specific plan for that project. And depending on what type of advice letter it is, staff would be able to approve that advice letter if it meets all of the ministerial requirements set out in the overarching decision. Some advice letters that are referred to as, for example, tier 3 would require a resolution that comes back to the commission for a vote. So I'm not sure if you're interested, but I can also probably send information that gives an overview of sort of a PowerPoint that has a flow chart of how the PUC makes decisions if you're interested.
That would probably be helpful just because a lot of us first years are in an environmental policy class right now here, and we talk about policy process for environmental policy in California. We haven't focused on the CPUC specifically, but we have walked through how those are proposed. So I would find that interesting.
Okay, I can send over materials. We've got a presentation that our ALJ division does that kind of walks through how a process works. And then I've got sort of a summary of what the different advice letters are.
Thank you. Yeah.
So again, we worked through a lot of these topics. They're still underway in many of our proceedings, and the issues are, many of them are in their later stages. So 5 years after we created the first DER action plan, we're facing a number of new policy changes and opportunities because a lot has happened in 5 years. So we've got a new wave of DERs in California. DER growth is expected to escalate in the coming years in response to the state's electrification and climate policies, changing grid and resiliency needs, and declining cost. California's climate goals are expected to result in millions of EVs by 2030. An executive order N7920 that Governor Newsom signed last year sets a target for all new cars and passenger truck sales to be zero emissions by 2035. So we're looking at 5 to 8 million EVs by 2030, which is roughly 250 gigawatt hours of aggregate storage. Many of these new DERs will be capable of shifting load, including electric vehicles, behind the meter storage, and space and water heating systems, which dispatch, they can be scheduled and controlled remotely. So I know that if you're looking at the CEC, they're doing a lot of work right now on regulations for automated appliances. And the new wave of DERs, which again, have a real focus on the new EVs. Heat pumps are going to pose challenges for demand management and distribution system planning operations, but also there's lots of opportunities here for making customer load more flexible, addressing the duck curve, and increasing customer resiliency and promoting equity. So again, these are some figures that looking at the energy that some of these DERs are looking at providing. We're looking at building decarbonization, substantial growth in regards to smart, flexible end uses. We're looking at doubling rooftop solar and 3.5 times growth in behind the meter storage. The Energy Commission recently adopted new building code standards that will be combining rooftop and behind the meter storage. So we're moving forward fairly quickly, and the number of reach codes in the state are increasing. So there's more electrification, and I just think it's a very exciting time, and we've got a lot of real opportunities if we can take them in regards to how we can electrify and make things more flexible. I think, the key to all of this is trying to use less energy or move when we use energy around so that we're not having to continue to rely on large baseload facilities. So the updating of the DER action plan. So given these shifting DER landscapes, the time again is right for this DER action plan to ensure we have a cohesive vision and roadmap for leveraging this DER growth to achieve our clean energy goals efficiently and equitably. So the DER action plan 2.0 vision includes DER deployment and integral. It basically centers around this fact that DER deployment is going to be critical to achieving our 100% clean energy future. So the PUC is always exploring new policies, technologies, and business models, ideas to advance DER deployment in a manner that maximizes ratepayer and societal value and contributes to equity and affordability for all customers. And we're committed to ensuring that DER policy is harmonized with CPUC policy directives related to safety, reliability, affordability, equity, and environmental stewardship, including but not limited to tribal consultation and engagement with disadvantaged communities. So collaboration with other agencies on the DER action plan includes California Energy Commission, the California Air Resources Board, and the California Independent System Operator. Stakeholders are critical to meeting the objectives of the DER action plan. We don't operate in a vacuum, and there's a lot of other responsibilities of other agencies that are interrelated with what we do. So it's really critical that we work closely with those other agencies in making decisions on how to move forward. So the DER action plan 2.0 has 4 tracks instead of 3. We've added a 4th track for customer programs. So we've got the load flexibility and rates, the grid infrastructure, market integration, and again, this 4th component for DER programs. So I'm going to provide an overview of each of these tracks in the next couple of slides, so I'm not going to go through each of these items here. So track 1, load flexibility and rates. So the load flexibility and rates track is focused on improving demand side resource management through more effective integrated resource demand response and retail rate structure that promote widespread, scalable, and flexible load strategies enabled by electrification and DER deployment opportunities. The vision and action elements address grid issues associated with growth of renewables, electrification, and DER adoption in support of California's clean energy goals. They minimize cost of electricity service and provide fair compensation for grid services provided by customer-owned DERs. So track 2 is grid infrastructure. The DERs can be a type of electrical infrastructure. Electrical infrastructure and DERs should be integrated and responsive to local conditions, rapidly and safely interconnected, interoperable, and cyber secure, and helpful for electrification. And I know that the cybersecurity, we're really taking a much closer look at that, given the number of DERs we're looking at deploying. There's unique aspects of cybersecurity associated with DERs that really need a close look if we're talking about this many individual energy sources. Track 3 is market integration. So the efficient integration of DERs into wholesale markets to support renewable integration, greenhouse gas reduction, and grid reliability. This track addresses how market integrated DERs are connected to the customer, distribution, and transmission grid domains, and how they can be harnessed and compensated to produce multiple streams of benefits. So the primary themes here are big picture and wholesale market integration of both behind the meter and front of the meter DERs, multiple use applications, wholesale market integration of exporting behind the meter DERs, and wholesale market integration of front of the meter DERs. Track 4 is the customer programs. And here we're looking to improve coordination, planning, and development consistent metrics across DER proceedings related to customer programs to maximize contributions to greenhouse gas reductions and other state energy goals. And we're looking to enable all customers to effectively manage their energy usage in a manner that ensures equitable participation and distribution of benefits, alignment with evolving rate design and load flexibility, alignment with distribution planning objectives, and alignment with integrated resource planning objectives. So we're really looking at how we can have these benefits across different customer groups. And I know we're looking at potentially some pilot projects in the central San Joaquin Valley that would look at being able to compensate customers for being able to shift load use, especially during that peak hours when it's most critical. And we're again, really seeing that change of when we need resources based on the transition to different types of technology being the resource supply. So are there any questions about the DER action plan? I do have links in the presentation, so you can look at that.
Is there any sort of like communication or collaboration between, whether you're a retail customer, you're talking about like rate demand and kind of demand response, there's incentives for us for certain commercial users of electricity through like our PG&E type of companies. Is there any sort of like, is that really just at their own best interest, business interest, or is that being pushed from your guys' side of like incentivize your customers, or is there like subsidies on their end, or like, is that like interconnected at all?
Yes, and I think it's not a clear, I think it's a combination of all of those things. There's a number of private companies also that like programs like Google Nest, or you've got Connect that are coming in to try and create these virtual power plants by taking large numbers of customers and getting them to shift their use of electricity during certain times and then be compensated for the savings of not having to pay these huge rates during those 2 to 3 hours of the day that we're finding when the solar is going off, but we don't have enough supply coming in for that 4 to 9 o'clock, depending on the time of year. So I think there's a lot of movement in that area and a lot of creativity, and third parties are coming in and they are very active in our proceedings to advocate for what they're trying to do in our efficiency proceedings and our resource adequacy proceedings. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the load flexibility proceeding that we're looking to open, but that's a really good question. So again, this is an area, I'm sorry.
In your opinion, what role community choice aggregates can play in this high DER future? Do you see them being a big player, or do you think more housing the next utilities, or how do you kind of see them being greater?
Community choice aggregation is going to have to be a big player. If you're looking at what's happening across the state right now, I think close to 1/3 of PG&E's territory is served by community choice aggregates. And by the end of next year, the current plan is that almost 90% of San Diego Gas and Electric's customers are going to be served by community choice aggregates. And Edison, they have a growing number there, but they've also, I think, had a couple of bumps with community choice aggregates that are being transitioned back to the utility. So, but based on the number of community choice aggregates that are out there, they're going to have to participate. And we're, there's partnerships being built with the IOUs and the community choice aggregates that allow them to operate some of these programs that have been traditionally operated by the utilities. And there's advantages to that because a lot of the community choice aggregates, especially the strong ones that are really active, know their customers better than the big IOUs do. And so they may be able to tailor programs that work better. And they're required by law to meet the same net metering requirements as the other utilities in the state. So, and they have resource adequacy requirements that also have to come through the PUC, and they look at penalties and other things in the same way as well. So they're gonna have to be a big part, and I think they want to be. The meetings I've had with them, they're very excited about the opportunity to, I think, get into these areas and to provide those services to their customers.
Just so we're all clear, could you say a few words about resource adequacy requirements? What those are, so we all understand that?
So the California Public Utilities Commission is charged with making sure that there's enough energy resources to adequately ensure that there's sufficient power to keep the lights on in California. And it is an ongoing proceeding where all of the load serving entities in the state have to provide their plans. So they have to show year ahead, they have to show several years ahead, and then there's different targets that they meet at different times. And some of this is changing based on what we saw last summer. And again, this changing curve of when we're needing the most power, but they're required under law to make sure that they're providing assurances that they're going to meet their requirements. And if they don't, then they could face certain penalties. They could be required to have, for local procurement, there's a local central procurement where the IOUs may have to provide backup procurement if a community choice aggregate or another load serving entity isn't able to meet those demands. If they are short, they may have to buy electricity on the market at whatever the price is for that day, as opposed to having secured it in advance where it's probably going to be at a better price. Is that?
That's useful. And actually, we were just in my, some of these folks are in my class. We were just talking about our local community choice aggregator, Valley Clean Energy. And so Valley Clean Energy, for instance, offers a rate that's 100% renewable power. And so how did Valley Clean Energy satisfy a resource adequacy requirement when their rate is for 100% clean, which is, I imagine, mainly wind and solar and stuff? How do they, guarantee that they can meet the electrical demand when wind and solar might not be so adequate?
So they also have to meet renewable portfolio standards with the commission. So they have to account for their energy sources and whether they're renewable or they're not renewable. Some CCAs are actually out there building new facilities, new solar facilities. There may be long-term contracts that are going to help incentivize new build. And some of their supply is, they're counting on these new build facilities, for example, so they'll enter into contracts for that. And then again, they have to meet their RPS requirements and make a showing of where that electricity is coming from, in addition to the resource adequacy proceedings, which is sort of the shorter term, making sure we've got the power adequate supply. There's also an integrated resource planning proceeding that we issued a decision not that long ago that's requiring 11,500 megawatts of new power by 2026. And we're going to be issuing another procurement decision in that proceeding by the end of this year that's going to be looking at more specifically whether there needs to be, how that's going to be procured. And so that would get more into looking at some of these sources. But so there's a certain amount of geothermal or biomass or a lot of the new power we're looking at, we are really relying on storage. There's a lot of new storage coming online that we're looking at. So that's still new, and we're seeing what's going to happen with it. But the idea is we're going to be transitioning out a lot of these gas facilities for looking at battery storage facilities.
This is Steve Wheeler online. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you say a bit more about microgrids? Why are they still illegal in California, and does this reform legalize them and require utilities to support them?
So microgrids are not illegal in California, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about microgrids a little bit later in the proceeding.
My understanding is that a microgrid is treated as a utility, which is an insurmountable obstacle.
I'm not sure exactly which you mean. I know that there's a number of microgrids, and I'm going to give some examples. For example, there's a number of tribes that have microgrids that were funded through the state's EPIC program. So there's a number of microgrids across the state that are that are utility owned, and there's a number that are not utility owned. There's some that CCAs own. So I think that's a misconception that they're considered, that a microgrid in and of itself is considered a utility. Or I think what you may be referring to is that there's some interconnection issues depending on how it's proposed.
The Oakland Eco Block, for example, had to get a pilot designation in order to be allowed to be a microgrid.
So I would have to look into that and get back to you, but they're not illegal, and there's a number of microgrids that are not utility owned.
Okay. How does the DER reform support them?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. What was the question?
So how does the DER reform support them?
So we have and as I was talking about, the action plan is trying to coordinate our proceedings. So the action plan is not a proceeding in itself. It's trying to look at policy that will help coordinate a number of proceedings, including our microgrid proceedings. So I'm going to be talking about the high DER proceeding that's looking at distribution planning. But we have a separate proceeding that is specifically looking at microgrids and microgrid expansion in the proceeding in California.
Thanks, Dave. We're going to have to proceed with the presentation, and we'll have some time for questions at the end.
And I'll try and go a little quicker because I know, but the load flexibility proceeding, I think, is going to be very important for making all of this work. Historically, the electric power system was designed under the assumption that customer demand for electricity was inflexible, and for the majority of the past 140 years, that approach made sense. Customer demand was inflexible. We didn't have widespread access to the tools and technologies needed to send time varying price signals or efficiently schedule end use loads, nor did we need them, since to a large extent our energy supply was flexible. Utilities could dispatch fossil fuel power plants in real time to match customer demand, which we touched on a little bit. Today, though, we're looking at a very different energy landscape in California. The state's renewable penetration and greenhouse gas reduction goals have transitioned a large part of our energy supply away from gas and coal-fired power plants to variable solar and wind resources, which produce the majority of our generation during certain times of the day. So to meet the SB 100 goals of powering all retail electricity sold in California with renewable and zero carbon resources by 2045, while cost effectively maintaining a reliable grid and electricity supply, means we no longer have the luxury of treating customer demand as an inflexible part of the energy equation. So again, we're facing increasing reliability and stability challenges due to increasing renewable penetration. So increasing renewable penetration is expected to increase evening ramp up 60%, and increased reliance on intermittent use is limited supply leads to reliability challenges, which we saw this last summer and the summer before. So one of the things we're looking at through this load flexibility proceeding is how DERs can be a cost-effective alternative, but highly scalable, low-cost deployment strategies are still needed. So we still have a lot to figure out, and that's what this proceeding is going to be geared toward. We're going to be looking at educating customers and creating the right signals for customers to do their part. And this isn't without challenges, especially in light of extreme temperatures and recent wildfires fueled by climate change. You know, depending on where you live in California, it may be difficult to turn your air conditioner off at certain points of the day, especially now that we're seeing temperatures that are still high into the evening. We do need, but just as we're looking at needing more flexibility, we're also gaining widespread access to tools and technology designed to make it easier to reshape demand and make it more responsive. You know, some of the load flexibility statutes were actually enacted in, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, but we didn't have the technology to make some of this work. So it's really exciting that we're able to physically do some of the things that I think were envisioned quite a long time ago. And so some of this includes cannot talk today, the mask for me. The proliferation of electric vehicles and behind the meter energy storage where charging can be scheduled, building space and water heating systems that can be controlled remotely, and the communications and power control systems to automate these activities. So customers can spend as much or as little time as they want thinking about how they're going to use their energy. And I don't, if you know, the CEC's IFER proceeding had a recent workshop on building grid integration that is very interesting. If anyone's interested, I would encourage you to go look at the recording online. They had a lot of examples of pilot projects, and it was so great to see that we are on the same page with the federal government on so many of these things now. So that is a huge change from just a short time ago, where we were constantly in court fighting with the federal government over this. But so current approaches to achieving demand flexibility. While the states implemented demand flexibility programs for decades, the current approaches are complex, inefficient, expensive, and confusing to most customers. This slide offers a snapshot of the many demand response programs available today, including an increasing number of special purpose retail rates offered by the utilities, community choice aggregates, multiple demand response programs focused on integration with the Cal ISO markets, and various other programs to incentivize DER ideal dispatch. So this complicated landscape has led to current demand response approaches that are administratively complex, difficult to understand, and that have limited adoption. So you can see here the load modifying demand response. We've got increasing number of special purpose IOU rates. We've got increasing number of CCAs and various rates. There's lengthy, as you were talking about, that we've got 100% renewable rates, lengthy rate making processes that are generally out of date, sometimes conflicting by the time we get to a decision. A lot has happened if it takes 2 or 3 years to get to a decision. So we've got, again, multiple programs focused on load shed on the supply side as resource adequacy, challenges in Cal ISO market integration, measurement, and verification, considering new programs for load shift for demand response, and administratively and technically complex. We've also got at the distribution level additional localized temporary rate incentive tariffs or incremental DER procurement contracts. So again, complex, inefficient, expensive, confusing. So the vision for the load flexibility rulemaking is, it begins with, we're going to be issuing a staff paper, and the CPUC rulemaking is anticipated to take place early next year. And it's going to explore new rate and demand response strategies to effectuate widespread load management in a more transactive DER marketplace based on real-time grid conditions. So again, we're looking at having this white paper come out and the rulemaking officially opened, hopefully by early next year. It was supposed to be this fall, but I think that there's a lot going on, especially with some of the emergency RA extreme reliability proceedings, but it is very close to being to moving forward. And the goal is that it's going to support long-term electrification, leverage more effective DR and retail rate design strategies, support and accelerate our clean energy goals, better address grid issues associated with the growth of renewables, electrification, and DER adoption, and promote fair and secure compensation for DERs. It's going to encourage mechanisms and automation technologies in an increasingly transactive bidirectional grid.
So can I ask a question about that? So, this is just really general, conceptual kind of questions. In general, I thought in the past, utilities came up with rates and they came to the PUC and the PUC approved them or didn't, and something like this. It came in that direction. Is this white paper something that says, here's the kind of rates we want that will do this, or is it something else? I don't understand.
So the white paper is going to basically look at options for advanced rates and demand response strategies. So how can we compensate customers for how can we create incentives for them through rates or other mechanisms to do what we need to allow for load flexibility and shift when we're using. So it's kind of a two-way street, I guess, at this point. So through the general rate case, the utility comes in with their application and they submit what their rates are. And some of that is based on things like this load flexibility rulemaking. When a decision comes out of there, it'll direct the utilities to do certain things, and then that will get factored into what they submit to us when they're requesting a decision in their general rate case.
So for instance, could the PUC say, we would like to see real-time rates where it varies every hour, or we don't want real-time rates, or
Yes.
is that the kind of thing that the PUC is, that this white paper might say?
Yes, the white paper might say that. It could say something like that. Then we would take comments from all the parties in the rulemaking, and that would be the utilities. It would most likely be California Independent System Operator, customer advocate groups like California Public Advocates Office, TURN, Sierra Club, Environmental Defense Fund. So there'd be a large number of parties participating that would all provide feedback and comment on the staff paper. And then ultimately a proposed decision would come out that would receive additional comments from the parties, and the commission would eventually vote.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. So the central purpose of the rulemaking will be to develop a unified, universal, dynamic economic signal, which we're calling UNIDE. And the UNIDE framework is envisioned to be implemented in 6 steps. And if anyone wants more in-depth information on this, there's a recording on the PUC website for another workshop that was held in May that kind of walked through this more with our technical staff. So the first step is to develop standardized universal access to current electricity price. Introduce, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, introduce dynamic prices based on real-time wholesale energy cost. And it would be opt-in, modify price per real-time localized grid conditions, and transition to a bi-directional prices, so buy and sell. And offer subscription opinion, so average load shape and energy quantity, and introduce transactive features, so the ability to lock in prices in advance. So one of the first steps in realizing this vision is creating a web-based price portal, which smart devices can access the energy price for a location on the ground in real time, similar to how your phone's able to access weather for any location at any given time. So you would buy and install the smart device. It would be embedded, the embedded EMS automatically connects via the internet. And the access real-time price time series, so it's hourly, sub-hourly, day ahead forecast, hour ahead forecast, and remote upgrade of EMS as needed for changes and new features. So it would look something like this, and this is already in process of being worked through. So this enables scalability and wide scale adoption. And it's easy to understand because we all use our phones. I think a lot of people that have behind the meter storage in their houses now, they've got their little mini power plant control room on their phones. And there was a question over here.
Yeah. Is it only connected through the internet so people who rent can use, like there's no physical connections needed at the house? Or
I believe it is connected, it's through the internet, and then it would, so I'm going to get into a little bit more on how this works. I don't think it's going to matter if you're renting or owning. So you would be able to connect through the internet, it would connect with your utility bill. And then there's also third parties that can help shepherd some of this that would be able to do a lot of the interim work for you. And this is sort of a diagram of what we're looking at. So once real-time locational price information is available to smart devices, the Unite Single would guide dispatch of devices in a customer's home. So you would have to get a smart meter. Because it interacts with that and your phone. So the home devices like electric vehicles or smart thermostats would be able to respond to this price signal, which would be based on the wholesale price of energy at the place and moment, and would provide a signal to the device when grid supply is tight in the area and energy prices are high. And when there's excess supply of energy on the grid and energy prices are low, the device can then be programmed to optimize when it runs based on these price signals, saving the customer money and helping reduce overall grid cost. An advanced version of this price signal would also be able to compensate devices like batteries for exporting energy to the grid, in addition to reducing on-site load.
But there was a key word, what you said. You said you would respond to wholesale prices, but the customer, they only care about the retail. So are we gonna see real-time retail rates that go up and down substantially? I think the current time of use rates, they vary by a cent or two, depending on whether we're between 4 and 9 and not 4 and 9. And that's not very much, okay? But a real-time rate can zip around. So, are we gonna get real-time rates? One, and then two, I don't think it matters to the customer if it's the wholesale rate, because what they care about is the retail, what they're paying.
Well, the wholesale rate is going to affect the retail rate. And so when the wholesale rates are high, if it's going to benefit the utility to pay less, then it can compensate the customer. And that's where some of these third parties have come in to work with the customers on being able to track the price for them. And so if, for example, they shift what they're using during these peak times, they could then get credited a certain amount of money for not using their washing machine during the net peak hours. And so and again, I should have had our engineering here, but they're going to be going into a lot of detail, and I encourage you to watch the workshop I referenced, and I can send a link to it. But the idea is that people will be able to track these prices in real time, and they'll be able to address how they want to use what appliances. And if they've got smart appliances, they can be programmed to be connected to when prices are high, waiting and going on later when they're lower. And it will ultimately have a benefit on rates, because if the utilities are paying less for energy, that pass-through cost is going to be less to the customer.
Thank you.
So the goal is to achieve widespread demand flexibility. And it's an ambitious goal, but the potential is to reduce curtailment, enhance reliability, minimize cost of service, and provide fair compensation for DER services. So opportunities include all of the things I just listed are what's listed here on the opportunities. And then before I move on to the high DER rulemaking, are there any more questions about the load flexibility rulemaking? I know that there's a MIDAS system that the CEC has been working on that's interconnected with all of this, and their load management rulemaking will also be tying into what we're doing with the demand flexibility. And if you're familiar with their load management rulemaking, one of the statute requires anything that the CEC approves through their load management has to be authorized through rates through the PUC. So one of the things that we're looking at with this load flexibility rulemaking is how that is going to translate into rates and what that's for.
A general question: how do you make sure that poor people will not pay much more for electricity in the next decade or two in California? And I'm not talking about poor communities that we know to identify and track, but the poor guy who lives in a rich community. that is renting, cannot buy smart appliances and so on? How do we make sure that they're not staying behind?
So that is a great question, and we are very concerned about that, and we've incorporated those issues into our proceedings. There's incentive programs, there's reduced rates, and certain programs, the smart thermostat, for example, could be provided at no cost under certain circumstances when you meet those requirements. We have a number of programs like our build program and programs that we're looking at that are focused on providing resources to low-income communities that would be looking at how to electrify those homes and make sure that they have both the wiring and the ability to utilize these technologies so that they're able to get advantages to that. So it's not an easy answer. We are trying to incorporate, though, measures into all of our programs that would make sure that there's funds set aside to try and make sure that equity issues are addressed and that everybody can benefit from these programs, not just select groups of people.
A follow-on question to that. That is some people will say that increasing the fixed rates on the bills may, Severn Borenstein and Next 10's kind of report about trying to address this inequity issues and also to encourage long-term electrification, right? Because otherwise the volumetric rates are going to only increase if we start putting in some of these programs and base that into. So is that also? I mean, I saw a lot of strategic thinking around rates. SMUD just approved their NEM successor rate, which doesn't quite have. I mean, it has this kind of prepaid agreement. They're going to pay 7.5 cents for every kilowatt hour sent back. I think it is. But it's what do you think of what SMUD's doing? How do you see fixed rates being, or increases in fixed rates being part of the solution to that?
So I can maybe move forward to the environmental social justice part of the presentation, and we can go back to the high DER if there's time. And just there's also, we have an affordability proceeding. We have the commission held an en banc with the Energy Commission in February to address affordability issues, and parties, including Boren, presented on their papers. So we are opening a third phase of that proceeding. In fact, the kickoff is later this afternoon of our 3:30 conference, and we'll be doing a follow-up workshop that'll be very similar to the en banc last February, where we will be following up on proposals that parties submitted. And the goal of this phase of that affordability proceeding is to take a much more in-depth look at what's been presented on how to address these equity issues and to make recommendations both to the legislature and the commission on how we can ensure that we're keeping rates affordable while still not leaving anybody behind. And that's a big challenge, but we're looking to meet that. And so our environmental social justice action plan, so the PUC's increased its focus on equity issues over the last few years. So almost all of our proceedings have to have an issue or question identified about how we're going to address equity issues in the proceeding for whatever the program or the general rate case or the issue is. And so our visions and actions for enhancing equity are set out in our the PUC's environmental and social justice action plan. And the plan provides an operating framework for addressing equity and environmental justice issues. And here it serves as both a commitment to furthering principles of environmental and social justice, as well as an operating framework in which to integrate ESG considerations throughout the agency's work. And so version 1.0 was adopted in February of 2019. And it had 9 goals to consistently integrate equity and access considerations throughout PUC proceedings and other efforts, increase investment in clean energy resources to benefit ESG communities, especially to improve local air quality and public health, strive to improve access to high quality water, communications, and transportation services for ESG communities, increase climate resiliency in ESG communities, enhance outreach and public participation opportunities for ESG communities to meaningfully participate in CPUC decision-making process and benefit from our programs, because as we've said, our programs can be very complex and difficult to participate in. We're looking at enhanced enforcement to ensure safety and consumer protections, promote economic and workforce development opportunities, improve training and staff development related to the EJ issues, and monitor the PUC's environmental social justice efforts to evaluate how they're achieving their objectives. So changes in version 2.0. So we're updating the plan, and the update should be coming out any day. There's going to be a webinar on November 3rd with information. If you Google the CPUC ESJ action plan, it should bring you to our page on our website. And there'll be information about a webinar that, again, is going to be on November 3rd to walk through the plan. But all action items have been updated to reflect present day priorities. The 9 goals that we just talked through are going to remain the same, though some may be reworded. The objectives, which underpin each of the 9 goals in the action plan, have been updated, and the action items are more equitably distributed across all divisions of the PUC. Appendices will include resource documents to assist PUC staff and stakeholders in incorporating issues into their work, the ESJ issues into their work, and it includes examples of proceedings and programs, a guide of definitions and terminology, and key documents for use in implementing the ESJ action plan. And again, if you want to provide feedback on the plan, there's information on our website, and in the PowerPoint here, you can get a copy of.
We need like 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, okay. So just, these are some of the tribal projects. These are microgrids where tribes received funding through the EPIC program in 2020. And I do want to this slide, these programs are not just tribal specific. Our self-generation incentive program, it offers rebates for customer-sided energy storage systems. Tribal communities are eligible, and so are disadvantaged communities. And there's a special set aside for both tribal and disadvantaged communities. And I think all of these, in all of these programs, we've also got the DAC STASH program, which is the disadvantaged community single-family affordable solar homes, and solar on multi-family affordable homes, SOMA, which offers incentives for low-income customers, sited solar. And then we've got a community solar green tariffs and DAC green tariffs program, which offers discounts and power purchasing structures for community solar. And I know that, as you mentioned, SMUD just adopted their most recent NEM determinations. We are in the process of doing that, and a decision is probably going to be issued sometime in the I don't know if it'll be before the end of the year or early next year, but we are also looking at these issues, and equity is a very important issue that we're looking at in the NEM realm as well. So there are a number of programs that specifically have funds that are set aside for disadvantaged communities, tribal communities. And just for a lot of these microgrids, broadband is going to be very important. And the PUC is very active and has a role in the broadband expansion across the state as well. But a lot of this is done by internet now, and these sort of virtual systems are going to need good internet access to be able to.
I think you just answered part of my question, maybe improved access to broadband, but if for a tribal community, Native American entity that gets a microgrid, how does that change, their lives? I mean, do more people get access to electricity? Does electricity prices go down? What's the benefit if you live there, having a microgrid?
So the Blue Lake Rancheria is a great example of what a microgrid was able to do for their community. So they're able to utilize that to provide power for their facilities on site. Their casino facility also serves as the emergency response area for the community. They have a hotel, they have homes that when the power went out for an outage a couple of years ago, I'm trying to make sure I've got the exact figures, but here, so it was able to supply energy to 10,000 Californians that had power during a planned grid outage. And the number of minutes the microgrid powered the central command center for the fire crews during a wildfire in 2017 when power wouldn't have been available, it was 78 minutes. And they've just shown time and time again, especially just recently with some of the transmission problems with the wildfires where the line went out up north, they were able to island and provide power that they wouldn't have had without the microgrid. And so it's been a critical resource that's been reported over and over as having been, and in fact, the CCA up in Humboldt County has just put in a microgrid at the airport, and they worked with the Blue Lake Rancheria, and they looked at what they were doing as part of moving forward with their project.
So the principal, if not the principal benefit, is just improve resilience when to these outages. They don't lose power or they lose less power.
Resilience, and then you have another situation like the Yurok tribe has a community that's not grid connected at the moment, and their primary source of energy is backup diesel. And so
That's a huge difference.
So that's
right?
a huge difference to put in a microgrid that's primarily operating off of solar and storage.
Yeah. So sometimes these microgrids bring electrical power to people who don't have it or rely on something terrible like diesel generators.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay,
Is
so
now good to open up to other questions?
yes, now is good. So just so you know, there is a section here on climate adaptation, but you can take a look at that with the slides, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Are we just raising hands for questions?
Yes, let's try raising hands. It's a foreign concept. but
I
we're
wrote
gonna
it
try
out and then got water on it. But so I was actually doing a lot of research on the EPIC program because for our policy class, again, I've been looking at trying to do a microgrid one, and I found that the SB 1339 that kind of created the program it's gotten criticism for favoring utility control over communities, control of microgrids, because microgrids are created to give communities more control over that power by having the PV and energy storage. So it kind of undercuts community-based microgrids because the utility corporations make a lot of money off of the construction, transmission lines, and other large capital projects. So I was just wondering, why would PG&E and the other two be put in charge of the microgrids when it's kind of going against what exactly microgrids are designed for, which is to take communities away from those transmission lines and dependence on them?
So I think there's a lot in that question.
There is a lot.
And, so I think that the EPIC program is administered partially by the utilities, but the larger portion of it is administered by the California Energy Commission. And I think that we're seeing an expansion of, and the PUC also has additional programs that are looking at microgrids. So, you know, we've also got like Redwood Energy CCA up in Humboldt County just put in a microgrid. We've got tribal microgrids. So I think this is expanding, but it's still new. And so in some cases, what we're seeing is that the utilities, because they have to do the interconnections and they may have more of the information about how the system runs and how it operates, that there needs to still be a lot of education with communities unless they want to put something in that's just completely islanded, that's not going to be connected to the grid. There's going to have to be some utility involvement. I think that there's different purposes for microgrids. And some of it, you know, deals with resiliency. We're seeing a need with, you know, the use with wildfire issues, but it's going to really be case specific. There may be communities that want the benefits of a microgrid but don't want to operate the microgrid. So they may want to not be connected, whether it's for safety reasons or wildfire, or if you look at the grid that PG&E put in, I think at Pollock Pines, it's a backup resource if they need PSPS or other reliability insurances. So there's lots of different reasons to look at microgrids. And some communities may want to control and have those. The PUC has programs where the IOUs are working with communities to provide technical assistance and background, but I don't think it's a one size fits all. And it's the energy system is obviously it's complicated. I know you all have a good understanding of this being in this program, but when you turn the lights on, there's a lot. You turn the switch on, there's a lot of things that go behind that. So I think we are all working to see where microgrids best fit in and how to make sure that communities are able to have the resources that we need. Again, I think the examples in here with the tribal microgrids, and when we're looking at some of the CCAs, those are clearly community-owned microgrids. And I know that there's other communities that are either working with the IOUs or looking at other options for microgrids, but I don't think it's a one size fits all, or that it's just about being able to go out and put up a microgrid and have that be able to provide all of the energy that a specific community needs.
I have follow-up questions, but other people.
Francisco, are you here? Did you have a question?
Paco, no,
Paco?
he's.
He's not here.
Can you read it for him?
He's online. Okay. Paco's a student in the class. Are tribal microgrids self-administered and managed? Do they have access to the profits?
So yes, like for example, the Blue Lake microgrid, which is the one that's used as the example that's been out there the longest. It's administered by the tribe. The tribe operates it. You can go into their tribal office and they've got this like computer screen on the wall, and it shows the energy coming in and what's happening with it. And so it is operated and administered by the tribe. They actually, I think, are working on their third microgrid at the moment. And I don't know if there's ever an opportunity for people to want to go up to Humboldt, but they're really great about doing a tour and talking through the program. They've also got some electric vehicle chargers that were also funded. And I think that would be a great opportunity to kind of see what a non-utility owned microgrid looks like and how it works with the system to go up and talk to the folks if we will.
Field trip. All right, any other questions from the room? Yeah.
I was just curious, how do you find disadvantaged communities? Is there any consideration given specific? Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
It's lunchtime all the time.
You were looking so confused. I was like, I know I'm just talking to myself. But I was curious if how disadvantaged communities are defined and if any consideration is given specifically to race. Because environmental and energy injustices are more determined by your race than they are actually by your income. You know, that's for many reasons, especially when it comes to the African American community. $80,000 income is different than someone else because of the financial inequities that have happened over hundreds of years. So is there any plan to, I guess, add in a factor for race instead of just finances?
So right now, a lot of the definitions are based off of the CalEnviroScreen definition, and I know that there are some problems with that definition. And we are looking at, you know, how we are using definitions, and I would encourage you to submit comments in our ESJ action plan that we're looking at right now. I think because of and in our affordability proceeding. At the moment, I think we are looking at both geography and income are the primary factors for looking at, and this overlap with the EnviroScreen and who's most adversely impacted for air quality, for example, or for water quality. And we have noted that there are problems with those definitions. And we also have a disadvantaged communities advisory committee and a low income oversight board that we seek information from, and there's appointments on those boards as well that give us input. So I'm not really answering your question because I think you're right that it is something that needs to be considered. But it seems like we haven't quite figured out how to do that in a way that is going to allow. I think that there's definitely an acknowledgement of that issue, that there's a disproportionate impact on African-American, Latino communities and non-white communities, and we vocalize that. And I would encourage you to look at the plan and make comments on that, because we make changes based on the record that we have in front of us and the comments that we get back. But I think that is an important issue that we should be looking at. Thank you.
Well, that's a question. I know we're a little over time here, but I just wanted to ask you as a commissioner, what do you think is the most important role of the CPUC in the clean energy? Or in other words, what can CPUC do to facilitate?
Let's see the right way. I think the PUC can do a lot. We set the policy and we direct the IOUs on things like procurement and how we're going to meet our goals. We also have to follow legislative directives, obviously, so it gets complicated. But I think one of the biggest things that we can do is we can look at how we can integrate, I think, a combination of things, the DER aspect that we're talking about with what we're doing in our resource adequacy and integrated resource procurement plans. We also, I think one of the major proceedings to watch is our natural gas transition proceeding, because that proceeding is going to be looking at what we do with our natural gas system and what that means, and as we move forward towards a clean energy future, and making sure that it's done equitably, because if we're looking at a lot of these programs and we're looking at new construction, some of the most vulnerable communities in the state could be the ones left with gas in the end and having to pay very high prices. So that proceeding, I think, is going to be important in setting the stage for how we move forward with our clean energy future, while still making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable communities in California. And I think that what commissioners say and do is important, and how I just want to say this right where it's not interpreted wrong, but I think that things also don't happen overnight at the same time, that these things move slower than a lot of people would like to see, and maybe faster than other people would. So having the balance of making sure that we're looking at what our priorities are and how we can move forward with them, and it's going to require making hard decisions, and we need to be able to do that. And I think that's where we can make the most difference. And I'm hoping that in my position, I'm able to help move forward with making some decisions as opposed to reacting to situations. And I know it's a combination of both with what we're looking at. So that may not have been a very clear answer.
All right, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Let's thank Commissioner Houck for spending the morning with us.